Boom, I'm in the room. Welcome, everybody, to Ordinary People's Extraordinary Stories. Now, I've got a great fellow on today. So, what I'll do is I'll bring him in and then we'll pose the questions and then we'll see where the conversation takes us. So, without too much further ado, let's bring in John. Welcome,
Thanks very much.
John.
Yeah,
It's great to have you. So,
thank you.
John, if you can tell me when and where you were born, and if you can describe to me what it was like where you grew up, the schools you went to, and the education that you received. So the platform's yours.
Okay, thanks, Tim. Glad to be here. My name is John A. Arend Brink, Brink, and as I said earlier, I live in central British Columbia, Canada. Everybody knows where Vancouver is. I'm 800 or 500 miles north of Vancouver, central British Columbia. I was born November the 1st, 1940, in northern Holland, the extreme northeastern part of Holland. And as you well know and are aware of, it was the beginning of the war that started Second World War, April 1940. And we were had a family in the extreme northeastern part of Holland, within 20 minutes of the German border and about 20 minutes from the sea. And Denmark would be further north from there. So a general idea of where we were. As I said, I was born November the 1st, 1940. My dad was drafted into the Dutch army in April of 1940. And my mom had two other children, one daughter, a sister now of me, that was 1 year older, and a brother 2 years older. Uh, my dad, the last time they heard from him was in the bombing of Rotterdam, where thousands of people died early in the war. And it would take 5 years before they would know if he had survived, was dead or alive. So the war years were difficult, to say the least. I still remember from the time I was 3.5, 4 years old, bombers overhead, hundreds of bombers overhead, bombing Germany. And it was a difficult time for our family and my mother and her three children. Uh, we would watch outside on the deck behind our house as the bombers were flying overhead, daytime and nighttime bombers. Not because it was so exciting to watch them, it was safer to be outside than inside. In a distance, we could see cities burning in Germany. And, so it was a difficult time. I still remember from the time I was 5 years old. Uh, there was not much food. The coldest winter on record in Holland was the winter 1944, 1945. They were called it the hunger winter. And we, as a small family, my mother and the three kids, we would go out in the morning with gunny sacks into the railroad and collect anything burnable and eatable. I still remember even now the extreme feeling of cold. I can still physically feel it. The same with the feeling of hunger, and then at the same knowing anxiety of my mother and the fear that everybody had being under occupation. Uh, I believe I was affected by the inner child anxiety of losing that one parent that was taking care of us, and then also seeing far too many things that I should not have seen, and affected by PTSD. So we were liberated by the Canadians April the 12th, 1945. I always knew from that point forward that I would go to, as soon as I could, to Canada, the land of my heroes. And, so I wanted to go when I was 17, but I was then drafted into the Dutch Air Force. My parents wouldn't let me go before that. And then I was for 2.5 years in the Dutch Air Force, and then worked in the lumber industry in Holland, and then finally emigrated when I was 24 years old. My academic life was not
Wow.
hopefully successful.
So let's just take you back then. That's a hell of an upbringing. Um,
Yeah,
so my parents went through the war, and my mother's still alive. She was born in '39, so she remembers the war and growing up just outside London. So yeah, so you was under occupation, and I guess it must have been really difficult. I mean, from your early days, can you remember much uh, about the area that you grew up in, and were the Germans in your town at that time?
we were under occupation, Tim. Every day was a difficult day, especially towards the latter end. When I was approaching 5 years old, every morning we would go out, the kids, my brother, my sister, with gunny sacks to collect anything burnable and eatable. We go in the railroad yards. If the parents would go in there, they would shoot them. Besides, they would
Mm.
boot us one, and we just came back the following day. But I still remember the sound of hundreds of airplanes in the air is a sound you will never forget. And then the other part being as you can visualize Holland, the northeastern part is the Canadians pushed the Germans through the west side of Holland, through
Yeah.
the north, through the province where I was born. They were trying to get back into Germany, and we were only 20 minutes away from the border. And they did have very little left at that point, the Germans, and were very scared of everything around them. We saw far too many people being shot and killed. And for a young person, I
Yeah.
remember well seeing far too many things that we should not have seen.
Mm. So being liberated at the end of the war, then that must have been quite something. But it didn't end there, did it? I mean, uh, you were liberated, but the rationing and the food must have still been scarce and all the rest of it, because you've got you've got the Germans leaving, you've got the Canadians coming through, and they were I guess they carried on fighting on, but they were held up at that time at the late '44 on the Elbe River, was it? Was it the Elbe or the Rhine? They didn't get across the Rhine until into '45.
You see, where I'm in the extreme northeastern part, the rivers, Holland is a delta, right? So the main rivers
Yeah,
are flowing through the center of Holland. And, so the Canadians came through the west side and pushed across the coast there into the extreme north. They liberated our town April the 12th, 1945. And then my dad came back after 5 years, but I never met him, or the kids never met him. We thought, for all intents and purposes, he was dead. And
mm,
so the other thing that a lot of people don't fully appreciate sometimes is that the war, although the war ended in Holland May the 5th, 1945, that the results of the after the war, to believe, or some people believe, that everything goes back to normal. That is not the
no,
case. Families never became the same again. A lot of things that we consider to be part of our normal living, it would take years and before it got back to any sense of normality. And it would take probably at least one generation, if not more than one, to get back to a sense of stability. And especially if you look around the world today, looking at the Ukraine, now at Israel and other places, is that the effect on young people and kids in particular, but to the whole population, that it will change their lives forever and for their generation for sure, and if not others. So you asked me about my education after the war.
Mm-hmm.
Things took time to get back to a sense of normal. Obviously, the family, my mom and dad were apart for 5 years, and it took time for them to readjust. I believe, in a way, they never did. My dad never would talk about the war, and developed a drinking problem that stayed with him till the end, although he was very functional and he was a very good parent, but alcohol was one of his challenges. For me, uh, I was not an academic success. I failed grade three and I failed grade seven three times. And then I was 14. And then the suggestion was made. My parents were beautiful people, but to send me to the mentally challenged school. Fortunately, they didn't do that or get me a job. So they got me a job in a furniture factory, and and I became a furniture maker.
Ah.
And
So just looking a little bit um, around the time that you the war ended, and although life never ever gets back to any sort of normality for some years, did you get into school, um, and your schooling days? How did that come about? Because was much of Holland destroyed during that period? I know Germany got pretty well beaten up, but I don't know about Holland at that time. Were were the schools and that
gets affected
damaged?
by 5 years of war, right? So,
Yeah.
but a lot of the infrastructure was still there. And the same in a way in Germany, Tim, that in Germany, obviously, the main industrial areas, the harbors, and some of the other key areas were bombed. But a lot
Mm.
of the smaller communities, average communities, really didn't. But still, obviously, as a big portion of the population did not directly or indirectly survive the war. So it took generations before things came back to normal. Interestingly enough, even when I was going to the lower classes in school, we already developed ongoing relationship with the German kids on the other side of the border, because in war like this, most of the population, same as in this war, we were all victims. The Germans as well
Mm.
as the Dutch, the English, the Belgian, and throughout the world. It was the leadership, Hitler, and the people around him that obviously controlled what was going on. So, but fairly quickly after the war, at least the two populations started interacting, but it took many, many, many years before things got back to normal, if you wish, if there is
Yeah.
such a. And but for me, in terms of in Holland, no different than likely for you, is that if you wanted to build a career and get married and buy a house, you had to have a good job, and you had to then have a good education. So every time I was troubled by the fact that I failed grade three, and obviously, finished my schooling at the age of 14 and became a laborer.
Mm.
So in a way, I kind of felt I had failed, and so, but at the same time, the I still had the dream of going to Canada.
Hmm.
And went to Canada when I was 24, and I
Yeah.
wanted to. I always knew that I had the same qualities than most other people had that went on to college and university. And I knew I could do it, but I had to start from nothing. So I left in July of 1965, one suitcase, three books, two set of clothes, and $150, and went to British Columbia to build a lumber mill.
Hmm. So
Arrived
let's
in
just
British,
take. Can I just take you back a little bit then? So you
yeah,
left school at 14, and your parents found you a job in a furniture or factory.
yeah,
So how did you start there? Did you start right at the lowest level, sweeping up the
yeah,
floor before you,
yeah,
you, you managed to
yeah.
go on? And
All of
how long were you at the factory?
I was there for a couple of years, and then I was getting ready to go into the Air Force. So I probably right up to the time that I was 17 and a half, and then I was 18. I was drafted into the Dutch Air Force, and then in the evenings I would go to college and do become a furniture maker and get qualifications to become
Hmm.
a furniture maker. So that's what I did.
So when you got drafted into the Air Force, um, what role did you get, and what rank did you come in at?
I came in as a trainee or an infantry soldier to get my training, and I was drafted in January of 1958, and in the Dutch Air Force, and they put me in special forces and Air Force Police. So that's what I did, and I stayed there for 2 months, 2 years, and 6 months.
Hmm. So whereabouts were you based then?
I was based in southern Holland initially. That's where I got my training, and then I was based in a number of other places, including a NATO base in Baden-Baden, in Germany. But most of the time, I was based at airports throughout Holland.
Hmm. Yeah. So the Dutch. So Baden, that's in Germany. Was that
Correct.
part of the occupation forces at the time?
Uh, well, this was 1958, right? So
Yeah.
the thing had become to more normal, if you wish. Again, there was Eastern Europe, Eastern Canada, Eastern Germany, and
East
Western.
Germany. Yeah.
So that already was no longer directly under the menace, under occupation by the occupying forces, save and
Mm.
except for the sharing of Berlin in east and west.
Yeah. I
So
say.
by then,
I spent.
that was a NATO base.
Yeah. I spent 2.5 years in Berlin, from 1978 to 1980,
Correct.
and we had an absolute wonderful time there. And
Correct.
before that, I was based in Munster
Oh, yeah.
in Germany.
Yeah.
Uh, so that's a lovely town actually. It wasn't that beaten up during the war. And then later, I did Celle as well in Germany. So I
Sure.
had 3 tours of Germany, which was
Sure.
great for us. Um,
Yeah.
so once you finished the Air Force, then and you were doing your evening studies to get your qualifications. Did you get the qualifications uh, while you were still in, or did you finish off when you came out of the Air Force?
Uh, when I was in the Air Force, it was pretty much quite busy, obviously, being, in special forces in particular. And then I did a fair amount of studying while I was at the Air Force, mainly in areas that had my interest, entrepreneurship, business, all of those kind of things.
Hmm. So what did you do when you left the Air Force after you'd finished your national service? I guess it would have been.
Yeah, so the I was nearly 21, and I worked in the forest industry, one of the largest lumber importer of Western Europe and Holland, and for about 3 years, and then decided to go to Canada.
So how easy was that for you to make that jump from Holland to Canada?
Well, Canada is paradise in my view, and obviously I didn't speak English, and I didn't know anybody here, didn't speak the language, didn't know a soul, and didn't have a job. So I arrived in Vancouver in July of 1965.
So I mean, most Dutch kids nowadays, I mean, all speak English as their second language. I guess English is almost the first language in Holland nowadays. With kids.
Correct.
So back in your day, then you didn't learn English at school.
Not in grade seven, no.
Okay.
Yeah,
So you
but
arrived in Canada then, not speaking English.
correct. No job, no family.
So what did you do? How what was your what? How did you fly? Did you fly there, or did you have to
Flight to
come across on
Montreal.
a? You flew.
Took the train 4 days, 5 nights from Montreal to Vancouver. Yeah. Came off the train, went to the immigration department. Fortunately, there was a German fellow, and I could speak some German. I talked to the German fellow, told him that I wanted to build my own lumber mill. And he said, go to Prince George. That's where they're building mills. That's where there's pulp mills, sawmills. So I took the bus to Prince George and came off the bus here in Prince George late July 1965. And I had a suitcase, two sets of clothes, three books, and then I had a total of
Wow.
$25.47.
You certainly couldn't retire on that amount of money.
No, or buy any lumber mills.
Yeah.
So, but what I did have attitude, I'm always positive, find my passion and work ethic. And so I got a job piling lumber. And then gradually, within a couple of years, I had bought an interest in a sawmill in the Yukon that is just next to Alaska.
Yeah.
And, and I was there for 5 years, left there, came back to Prince George, and then started an operation here. They call it the Brink Forest Products Company, and started building a forest company. And
Wow.
now, nearly 50 years later, that was in 1975, I started the company. Now, 50 years later, we have one of the larger forest companies in Canada. We have 10 other different companies. We employ normally around 400 people or so. And I'm an author since that time. Wrote three books, Against All Odds. It's not a hurrah, hurrah, John. It's a biology of John, biographic book, not about hurrah, hurrah, John, but in spite of it all. Then wrote another book that is Finding Your Passion, Living the Dream. Just want to make sure I get it on the camera
Yeah.
here. Living the Dream. And then the other thing that I didn't know I had is that in 1997, I walked into a store here and a bookstore, and I opened a book, and the title of the book was Driven to Distraction, and it was about ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And I said, oh my God, that's me. And I bought the book, started to know more about ADHD, and then I don't know how familiar you are with ADHD. I
I've
call
heard
it,
of it. Yeah.
yeah, I call it a superpower.
Mm.
And I wrote a book about it. ADHD Unlocked, very popular. Trying to get it on the camera. There we go.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. So and started speaking about it more. So I'm a very active public speaker throughout North America, mainly, and and obviously I'm writing another book that comes out. A couple more books actually. I do at least one book a year. That book is Living Young, Dying Old, and the purpose of the book is not so much as to how old you are in years, but the quality of life.
Mm.
And so that book will come out next June. So I've been very active between running close to 10 companies and then podcasting. I'm fairly active podcasting and public speaking, and then obviously the same as books.
Mm. Now, the books, are they available in audio versions?
Yes, they are, yeah, on
So
all
you get,
major mediums.
so somebody wants to get your books. What I'll do is I'll put them in the description.
Yeah,
So anybody
and they're
wants
included
to
in
dive in.
on Google. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
fantastic.
yeah, johnabrink.com.
Hmm.
Should
So working at these or building these 10 companies up, um, that must have taken quite a bit of time and courage and funds. So you've obviously driven to be able to get to where you are. And are you still working that hard nowadays? I
yeah,
mean,
I
what are
am
you, 80, 83?
83 November the 1st. Yeah. So I work probably 60 hours a week at least. Yeah.
And that just keeps you going.
Yeah, I like.
Keeps you out of mischief, I guess.
Yeah, the other thing that I do is I go to the gym, stay in shape. I've been a competitive bodybuilder. I'm probably the oldest competitive bodybuilder in North America, and and I like it. I enjoy it. Qualified for bodybuilding in northern British Columbia, second in bodybuilding, third in physique. That qualified me for the provincials. Came in third in bodybuilding, second physique. That qualified me for the nationals in the Arnolds. Then came
Wow.
COVID. I started again on bodybuilding. I will compete again when I'm 84.
Wow. Well, you're a real inspiration there. So, I'm only 65, and underneath this gorgeous exterior, there's an absolute train wreck going on at the moment. I struggle at getting out of bed in the morning, and some mornings I can't even do that. Not without help, anyway.
Yeah, there is nothing more important than there is only one of you, and
Mm,
to stay fit, healthy, from diet as well as exercise. Everybody doesn't have to be competitive like I am, but
mm,
to keep in shape physically, mentally, and diet extremely important.
yeah,
And then that to me means that's what my book is all about. Living young, dying old. Is that stay fit, stay mentally, physically, watch your diet, be proactive in terms of this precious body that we have. We only have one of it, although it is very forgiving, but there's only so
yeah,
much of. And a lot of people give up and say, "I'm too old for that. I'm too old for this. I'm too old for that." Right? So lay on the couch, watch TV. Right?
yeah. I don't quite do that. I try and get myself moving every day, but yeah, I'm riddled with rheumatoid arthritis, a load of osteoarthritis going on, and a few other things. And it's a bit of a struggle at times. But we're not talking about me so much. We're talking about you. So, in all that time that you've been in Canada, have you ever been back to Holland, back
Oh
to
yeah,
the
I used to. I
Netherlands?
still have an apartment in Holland. I still have some business involvement in Holland, and not doing COVID. But normally, what I like to do is go a couple of times a year, go back. It's so easy now, right? So I've
Yeah.
even gone. I used to go for 4 or 5 days or for a week maximum, and so it's not a problem. It's easy enough, right?
Mm.
So much easier than when I came here.
Yeah. I guess. I guess you've really settled there. So you're obviously a Canadian citizen now. Do you have dual nationality?
No, I'm Canadian. I didn't preserve my Dutch. I don't intend to go back there to live.
Hmm.
My I live here in Canada. I'm proud to be a Canadian. I love it, and I love Canada. I love British Columbia. You know?
Mm.
Yeah.
It sounds like a wonderful place to live.
Yes.
So, did you get married at all there?
Oh yeah. I'm married. Yeah.
So
I've
you
been
got
here
married?
for more than 40 years. Yeah.
Blimey, you must have got on with her then.
Yeah. No. No. For sure. Yeah.
So, out of all your achievements, what do you think is your greatest achievement to date?
My greatest achievement,
Hmm.
I believe, to be considered to be a good person, a good businessman too, but a good person, to be active in the community and to give back culturally. That's how I was brought up: is to be active in your community and in the culture around it, and to be. I love making presentations to young people, although I speak to my keynote speeches are going across the board, being motivational, entrepreneurship, and all the other things. Obviously, ADHD is one of them, and all of those kind of things. But first and foremost is to be active in the community and in the province and in Canada, and to give back. So
Mm.
uh, making money to me has never been a priority. Uh, but to be active in the community to me is important, and to be interactive with young people.
Yeah. So you've got sort of around about sort of 400 people on your books across your different companies.
Yeah.
Do you ever take an active part in recruiting them, or do you leave it up to the the human resources department?
Well, we have human resources in each of our companies, and some of them under the umbrella. Senior management, I'm very involved in terms of making sure that we attract the right people, right?
Hmm.
And so, indirectly, I'm the sole owner of my companies, and so it's not a public company, and there's not a multiple shareholders. It's just myself in our company, which is kind of out of the ordinary. Usually, it's
Yeah.
companies our size usually have either are public or otherwise have many other shareholders. I don't. I just have myself,
Hmm.
and it gives me. I'm being very proactive in making sure that it follows principles that are important to me.
Hmm. That sounds good. So I mean, you how have you coped with? I mean, obviously there's been a few recessions over the years. I mean, 2007, eight had a massive impact on lots and lots of people. Has that affected you at all?
I started my company in 1975. This company, nearly 50 years. next year 49 years actually, and I've been through 7 or 8 major downturns. Then 2007, 8, 9. I considered that to be probably one of the most challenging recessions, approaching depression, but it was dwarfed by COVID and what follows COVID,
Mm.
including today. Still, business is difficult and challenging, but I obviously have survived all the other ones. I've been there before, and that is the most important ability for management to grow companies and deal with adversity is experience. And
Mm.
I'm very fortunate enough that I have lots of it. You know,
So you built in lots of resilience into your companies to be able to withstand these challenging times. I mean,
yeah,
how did the pandemic affect your businesses? How did it affect your workforce? Were they able to come into work?
no,
Were they furloughed?
no, they mostly kept working in our case, but a lot of times we're affected physically by COVID. And so then, since COVID, really, the workforce is still not back to where it used to be at one point, and it may still take more time. It was the adversity of it affected all levels of individuals in governments, companies throughout the world, and it will still take time. Even now, our absentee rates are very high, and the people that have not come back to the workforce, there's a shortage of skill sets in particular, all directly and indirectly effects of COVID and COVID related issues that made things change.
Hmm. Do you have a workforce that works from home at all, or
Yeah, not less so now, but we did a portion of it. Yeah.
because I know lots and lots of companies, and particularly um, the government side of things, civil service over here, lots of them are still working from home and not being overly productive. Do you see the similar sort of thing over there in Canada?
Well, with all due respect to my friends that work for government, hard work has never been part of that, really. So we try to avoid them in our companies, and so uh, yeah, they probably the same issues that you have there, we have here.
Mm.
Then in our company, we instill. I like to see urgency, and I like to see commitment to quality and a number of other things. And uh, that is sometimes harder to achieve. People from Eastern Europe are more committed and appreciative of their jobs. Uh, I'm not always sure that is the case with our local or
Mm.
region workforce.
So, John, where do you see yourself going in the next, say, 5 years?
Well, a couple of things. I intend to be die when I'm 120. So I'm going to be around for quite a while, and
Yep.
and then in the next 5 years, we probably will change our company. We will double probably in size, and working towards that. Depending on what will happen around the world. Obviously, we are well aware of situations in Eastern Europe, the Ukraine. Obviously, we're well aware of Israel and in the whole
Yep.
situation there. That once we get back to stability of some sort, that I think the underlying economy has the potential of being strong. So I look at that 5 years from now, 2028, 2030, we'll see strong economies in Europe and North America and Asia. And, more and more what we see, Tim, is that the marketplace, even for companies like ours, is more and more global.
Mm.
And we will be very active in that. So, the other part about it is that that is my companies. The other thing, personally, I will be again very active as a in-demand keynote speaker. I will write at least one book a year, and I will be very active in podcasting. I do usually about 13 podcasts a month, 3 a week, and then I'm usually at least a guest, like on your show here, on one show per week. So I think we probably approaching 200 podcasts or so, and of all different topics, all across the board, and
Yeah,
all across the world. And so that's kind of what I do.
fantastic. Well, John, I think you've had something of a fascinating life. From that awful start in life during the Second World War to where you are nowadays, and much respect for that.
And the key to it, and the foundation to it, Tim, that's why I tell people, not so
Yeah,
much 2547, but attitude.
attitude.
Remain positive, avoid negative, find that passion, and then if you don't, I heard a program in the US channel in the last couple of weeks that said 70% of the people in the United States don't like their job, and 75% of the 70% are looking for other jobs. And I say, not good, not healthy. Find
No,
something you love to do, and then give it all you got,
absolutely.
and then work ethic, and the combination of the all means success. And that's kind
Absolutely.
of the way I look at it. I usually get up at
Fantastic.
5:30 in the morning, and I always feel I'm late, and so I'm always in a hurry.
Fantastic. So, having a positive mental attitude, a passion, and that work ethic has got you to where you are today.
No question about that.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, John, for sharing.
Thanks, Tim. It was my
Yo,
pleasure.
sorry about that.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah.
Wow, what a life story. I think John has really shown that with a little bit of positive mental attitude, passion, and work ethic, you can achieve just about anything. So, until next time, TTFN. Ta ta for now.